World is marking the 70th anniversary of the outbreak of World War II. Leaders from 20 countries are in Poland, the first country that was attacked by Nazi Germany. Meanwhile, memorial ceremonies are being held in the city of Gdansk, the scene of the first battle. Well, later in the day, Prime Minister Vladimir Putin will be among the guests to pay tribute to the victims of the bloodiest conflict in history. Well, for more, I'm now joined by Oksana Boyka, who's following events for us in Poland. Oksana, relations between Moscow and Warsaw, they've been somewhat frosty recently, haven't they? Talk us through the main sticking points.
Well, indeed, relations between Moscow and Warsaw leave much to be desired, and one of the reasons for that is different interpretations of what happened 70 years ago, and more specifically, the role of the Soviet Union in the World War II. You know, here in Poland, some politicians suggest that Moscow was not so much a liberator of Poland as traditionally thought, but also an aggressor, and that it was as much responsible for the start of the World War II as was, for example, Nazi Germany. This notion is, of course, very offensive for Russian ears, and this kind of the debate prevented the two countries from developing a friendly relationship. Now, trade between the two leaves much to be desired, quite meager at this point. There's also a number of Polish policies that have been perceived as openly anti-Russian in Moscow. For example, Polish intention to play host to the EU's anti-ballistic missiles installations, also Polish opposition to Russian-German gas pipeline. And some of these sticking points will definitely be on the agenda for prime ministerial talks today. At least on the Russian side, there is a desire to move ahead. For example, in his article that was published yesterday in one of the Polish newspapers, Russian Prime Minister Vladimir Putin said that it was a time for Russia and Poland to move ahead, and even expressed hope that one day relations between Moscow and Warsaw would be as good as relations between Russia and Germany. Despite being enemies 70 years ago, Germany is now Russia's largest trading partner. Political dialogue is booming. So there is definitely an example to follow. But whether this Russian calling will be heard in Warsaw is still to be seen.
Well, Oksana, you alluded there to an article that was recently written by Prime Minister Vladimir Putin, in which he primarily focused on how history can be interpreted differently, which you pointed out is a matter of debate between Moscow and Warsaw. Is that issue likely to come up again today during the commemorative events?
Well, Alice, I think this issue is not only likely to come up, there are concerns that it can actually overshadow the very tragic anniversary that brought all these leaders together in Poland. There's even a saying here in Poland that when, for example, Poles and Germans come together, they can discuss all sorts of things. They can talk about trade, they can talk about investment, they can discuss culture. But when Russians and Poles come together, they can only talk about history, what happened 70 years ago and who was responsible for that. In the article that you mentioned, authored by Vladimir Putin, he also brings up these issues, saying that it was very harmful for both countries to try to speculate on history and to try to use some of its parts for immediate political gains. He also pointed out that while he didn't try to defend Stalin's policies and the Soviet Union signing a non-aggression pact with Germany in 1939, he could understand reasons why the Soviet leader, I should say, decided to do so. And he also mentioned that back in the late 1930s, there were absolutely no saints in Europe, and that each and every country in some way contributed to the World War II and to the startup of the hostilities. But once again, he expressed hope that the two countries can come to some sort of compromise on this issue, and that tragic events in the past would not prevent them from developing good ties in the present and in the future.
An emotionally charged day expected in Poland. Of course, we will be covering it all closely here on RT. Oksana Boyka following those events for us. Thank you very much.